Hey guys, this is Michael, co-founder of ICAMed, and thank you very much for watching this very first video of our UCAT resource series. So in this video, I want to tackle a really important question. What is the UCAT and what does it even assess? See, I think by just talking to students, and I talk to a lot of students every day, a lot of people, kind of know what UCAT is, but don't really know. And as a result, they put a lot of time and effort into preparing in such a way that doesn't actually help them at the end of the day. And worst of all, you've got a lot of students who work hard, have great attitudes and motivations towards why they want to study medicine or dentistry, but due to this misalignment, miss out big time. So I really want to spend some time to clarify all this up. So UCAT, what does it stand for? It stands for University Clinical Aptitude Test, right? And the key word here is really aptitude. The word aptitude is another fancy word for ability or skill, but in this case, a particular way of how you think. And this thinking process is what we call logical reasoning with evidence-based decision making. So what is this logical reasoning with evidence-based decision making? Well, it's a core thinking process that good health professionals have, and they use it for all sorts of things. Diagnosing patients, recommending treatment options. All this needs to be thought through in a very careful, systematic, and objective way, and most importantly, highly detailed and very critical. You don't want a doctor who thinks about maybe what's wrong with you with guesses, emotions intertwined in their decision-making skills, because a part of that could lead to misdiagnosis or even worse, the wrong treatment, which could, instead of not doing anything for the patients, harm them in the long term. So really, UCAT is assessing this particular way of how one thinks. And this particular way of how one thinks is replicated in the questions that they provide you in the actual exam, so that if you can do them well, it means that you are able to think in this particular way to get them right. And if you get enough right, you obviously get a good mark. So that's how it really fits. So when we're looking at UCAT as a fundamental pillar, one of the three that is commonly used for selection into medicine and dentistry, we're really looking at, what place it has. So yes, I mentioned that it's about your way of thinking, it's about a particular skill. So what about the other two? Well, just briefly, the other one is what we call your ATAR, right? So in Australia, the ATAR stands for Australian Tertiary Admissions Rank. And depending on how well you do in your school subjects, you'll get a certain rank at the end of the day, at the end of high school, that shows where you're placed relative to everyone else. So to me, the ATAR is more about how much knowledge you've acquired from the subject you've studied and how good you are at studying, especially when in the final year of high school, often a lot of subjects are very content heavy. And the better the ATAR shows not only, a relative degree of mastery in the subjects that you did, but also gives confidence in the medical schools that you can actually study well, within a very intensive environment, such as a medical and dental program. So that's used as well. You've got the UCAT, which I mentioned before, is about this completely different skill. And interviews is the third pillar. And interviews are usually used at the end of the year based on students' ATAR and UCAT's scores. They look at other aspects of the candidate. And what I call them are what I call traits. So traits are very, very important, and they focus on things like attributes, other skills other than evidence-based decision making. You're also looking at things like motivations. You're also looking at things like fundamental values and maybe certain beliefs and goals that you have as a future medical practitioner. So when we're looking at the interview, it really focuses on what else can you bring, right? On top of being good at studying and thinking in this very critical, logical way. And together, they form the three pillars of the selection process. And often than not, they are similarly or equally weighted at the end of the day when it comes to choosing, who is going to be accepted into this program. And often people don't know that. Students often focus on their ATAR a lot, and fair enough, I can see why, because it's something that is heavily emphasized throughout high school life. But don't forget that to become a good doctor or dentist, you also have to be very, very competent in other things as well, not just being really good at studying. So UCAT it really is a test that is made to look at this very unique but extremely important skill that one needs to be, competent in. And frankly, if you're able to make great evidence-based decisions, it means that throughout med school, through your learning, through your development, you actually hone your skills enough so that you become an effective medical practitioner, right? So really, that's what the UCAT is for. So when we understand that UCAT is an aptitude test, we also have to understand what that really means as students. Number one, okay, it means that with a UCAT, we are being assessed on not just a skill, right? So when I talk about skill-based learning or skill-based assessments, I usually give examples of things like, how one would bake a cake, how one would drive, how one would solve math questions. So if anything, math is more similar to UCAT than any other subject you have at school. See, every other subject pretty much focuses on knowledge, and all you have to do in exams is to recall that knowledge. But with math, you're given the question and you're required to go through a series of steps, we call that working, right, to solve the question. Likewise, with baking a cake, you have to go through the recipe, the instructions, and do it in a particular order so that the next step will benefit from the previous in getting your result, good, and having a good cake and a yummy cake, I guess. Likewise, if you've learned recently how to drive a car, that also plays it in part, that you have to do certain things before other things so that you can actually drive the car safely and to your destination. So when we're really looking at this UCAT side of things, it's much more than knowing just what the process looks like, but is actually being able to use it. And specifically in UCAT, that process is part of how you think. So it's kind of like a weird test, because right now we're used to things like, all right, dealing with working in the form of math with numbers. We're dealing with, for example, recipes online for baking a cake. But this particular UCAT test focuses on your skill of how you are thinking. So it's a thinking test. But not only that, it's about how conscious you are about how you're thinking and whether or not you're able to adjust that thinking in order for it to be evidence-based and in order for it to answer UCAT questions based on whatever they give you. So that sounds like a whole lot of stuff, but long story short, it's a skill-based test focusing on how you think, and it's adapted towards a very particular set of questions that scrutinizes the way you think and needs to be of a particular way for you actually to answer the questions correctly and do them within the time limit. Which focuses on the next thing. What's the other thing that's unique about UCAT? Well, it's done with not a lot of time. Okay. In fact, a lot of people think that the UCAT is one of the most time pressuring or demanding tests there is. So not only are you required to think in a very particular way, you're required to think in a very particular way with very little time. So what that means is that with a UCAT test, to do well in it, not only do you have to be very conscious of how you're thinking, but you also have to know it so well that you can adapt it willingly, depending on whatever question you can get. But a mastery of this thinking skill is required for you to actually pull off a good mark, right? And that's what separates good candidates from not so good candidates, and that a good candidate will be able to get more questions right, therefore showing consistency in how they're able to think in this evidence-based manner, and other students won't be able to, and that's because they haven't honed their skills in this particular department. So long story short, that's what the UCAT is about. The other thing I actually want to point out is how this test is actually conducted. So UCAT itself contains 5 sections, section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Section 1 focuses on what we call verbal reasoning, section 2 is what we call decision making, section 3 quantitative reasoning, section 4 abstract reasoning, and section 5 situational judgment. So each of these questions are made in such a way they're worded to focus on specifically a particular aspect of evidence-based decision-making. So they're all evidence-based decision-making, type questions, whereby you always get the premise, which contains the evidence. You have to sift through it and understand it. Then it always contains a question that asks you something about that premise, and then you're actually given answer options. So it's also a multiple choice test, whereby you need to actually go through each option and mindfully and confidently validate certain answers so that you can choose one correct one, right? So that's what we're kind of talking about. We're kind of talking about this deductive process. And the idea behind this test, it's a computerized test, just so that everyone knows, is that there is a certain amount of time given, right, for each of the question types and each of the sections. So for example, in section 1, you're given 21 minutes to do 44 seconds, of which you get, on average, 28.6 seconds per question, including the reading of the premise, right? So it's not just answering the actual questions, it's the actual premise reading itself as well. Section 2, you get 31 minutes to do 29 questions, of which then, if you do the math, gives you 64.1 seconds. right? Section 3, 24 minutes, 36 questions, and therefore 40 seconds per question. Section 4, 13 minutes, 55 questions. Okay, that's a lot of questions in that time, of which then you get 14.2 seconds per question, all right? And finally, section 5, 26 minutes, 69 questions, and 22.6 seconds. That's the average amount of time you get per question. So when you stack it up like that, and we stack it up in this way because UCAT is set as essentially 5 mini exams. So you get 2 hours to cover all the sections, and you get 233 questions you have to answer. And everyone starts in section 1, given 21 minutes, and then you're forced onto section 2, given 31 minutes, forced onto section 3, 24 minutes, and then section 4, 13 minutes, section 5, 26 minutes. And as you go through these questions, you're assessed on different aspects of evidence-based decision making because the questions are actually quite different. So think about it as kind of like a giant math test with 5 major topics inside. And within these topics, there are variations in terms of the types of questions you actually get. So that makes UCAT, quite a comprehensive and I guess a relatively complex test on top of having that time pressure. So I think what this all means is that before we jump into preparation, it is really worthwhile to take a step back and think carefully about what this test involves so that we can plan an efficient and effective means of success. And I know everyone has very limited time in their day, and usually students who aim to get into medical school and dentistry lead very busy lives already. So it's extra important for us to understand exactly what skills are required, how we need to prepare ourselves to be truly ready so that the actual, assessment outcomes or your levels of competency are where they need to be for you to do well. So hopefully this quick video has given you a little bit of insight in terms of the fact that med schools nowadays don't really care about students who study really well, don't only care about students who are great at being empathetic, communicating, great leadership, teamwork, so on and so forth, but also this very unique but extremely important skill that you need to absolutely hone. That's it. See you in the next video.